Chapter 1. Prisoners of War. It has long been a question in my mind whether the people of the United States really know the manner in which the prisoners of war, taken by the rebels in the contest, which has so long raged, have been treated. The moment a soldier is taken prisoner, his sufferings begin. He is robbed, beaten, insulted, and abused in every possible manner. It matters not whether he be sick or wounded, whether he be able to walk or not. He must submit to the tender mercies of a set of men, whose conduct, as hereinafter shown, would disgrace the most uncivilized savages. One or two examples will illustrate the general treatment. Colonel Streight, taken prisoner in Georgia and sent to Richmond, was marched on foot the whole distance, hundreds of miles, and all the way insulted by the guards and the people. One man stepped up to him, and, deliberately spitting in his face, said, "You damn Yankee son of a bitch, I wish you were dead." Is this a solitary instance? No, indeed. It is only one of 1,000. The Hon. Alfred Ely, member of Congress from New York, taken prisoner at Bull Run, was paraded through the streets of Richmond with a guard of soldiers and a crowd of men, women, and children, whooping, yelling, and screaming at him. One woman came up to him, shook her fist in his face, and exclaimed, "Oh, you infernal Yankee, we'll hang you yet." Another said, "I wish I had a pistol, I'd shoot you." A man attempted to strike him with a brickbat, but the guard interfered. He was finally thrust into a loathsome cell, with no bed but the floor, and no food but a bit of cornbread and a piece of meat, which he could not eat. For weeks he was not allowed to hear from home, nor to write. Other prisoners fared no better. Some were put into a tobacco warehouse, without beds, blankets, or proper food. They were insulted by the guards, taunted with being Yankees, and denied the commonest comforts of life. At Columbia, South Carolina, our officers were confined in the lunatic asylum. They were kept in rooms without fire, in the coldest weather, and had to burn their furniture to keep from freezing. In Charleston, officers were placed under fire of our own guns in retaliation, as was pretended, for the putting of rebel prisoners in exposed places. In the stockade at Andersonville, the sufferings of our men were beyond description. They were confined in a small space, without shelter, without food, and without clothing. They were exposed to the sun and rain, ate uncooked cornmeal, drank filthy water, and died by thousands. From May 1864 to August, 12,000 men died in that horrible place. At Milan and Florence, it was little better. The hospitals were mere sheds, the surgeons had no medicine, and the sick lay on the ground with nothing to cover them. The guards were brutal, and shot men down for the smallest offense. Men were shot for reaching under the deadline for a chip or a bit of wood to cook with. These are but specimens of the treatment. There is not a prison pen in the South where similar scenes have not been enacted. Let the people of the loyal states know it. Let them understand what their brave sons have suffered. Let them not forget it. Let them not forgive it until justice is done. Let them not rest until the authors of these atrocities are brought to trial and punished as they deserve. Let them never cease to remember that 20,000 Union soldiers lie in Southern soil, uncoffined, unshrouded, their bones bleaching under the Southern sun, the victims of a cruelty unparalleled in the history of war. Let them remember Andersonville, and Libby, and Salisbury, and Belle Isle. Let them remember the long days of hunger, the sleepless nights, the broken hearts, the early graves. Let them remember the men who died with their eyes fixed on the North Star, murmuring of home and country. Let them remember the noble fellows who pined away and died because their captors refused to exchange them, though thousands of rebels were allowed to return to their homes. Let them remember that all this was done by men who now seek office and power in the government they tried to destroy. Let them see to it that such men are never placed in position to repeat their crimes. Let them demand that Jeff, Davis, and Winder, and Wirtz, and all who were engaged in this system of murder shall suffer the just penalty of their crimes. It is not enough that the war is over. It is not enough that the Union is saved. It is not enough that the flag floats over every state. We want justice as well as peace. We want the guilty punished as well as the innocent spared. We want it made known that this government will protect its soldiers, dead or alive. We want it understood that such crimes against humanity shall never go unpunished. The following pages will show how the prisoners were treated. They are a record of facts. The writer was himself a prisoner nearly 2 years and speaks from knowledge. He was confined in Libby, Belle Isle, Macon, Savannah, Charleston, Columbia, and other places. He suffered all the hardships he describes. He saw others suffer. He gives names, dates, places, and facts. He challenges contradiction. Let the loyal people of the country read and remember. Let them see to it that no rebel who took part in these barbarities shall ever rule over them. Let them see to it that their representatives in Congress know the truth and act upon it. Let them feel that if they forget the dead, they are not worthy of the living. Chapter 2. Straits Expedition continued. After having crossed the Tennessee River at Eastport, we proceeded through Tuscumbia, Russellville, and Mount Hope to the rich and fertile valley of the Black Warrior. At Tuscumbia, we were joined by a battalion of the 1st Alabama Union Cavalry, numbering about 100 men, under command of Captain Smith. From thence we pushed on through Thornhill and Bear Creek Valley, the advance of our brigade constantly skirmishing with rebel scouts, until we reached the vicinity of Blountsville. Here we encountered a rebel force attempting to destroy the bridge across Black Creek. The bridge was fired in several places, but we succeeded in extinguishing the flames and saved the structure. This important achievement was due in a great measure to the gallantry and daring of a lady resident, Miss Emma Sansom, who mounted behind Colonel Strait and guided him through the country to a ford above the bridge, thus enabling him to flank the enemy. The preservation of this bridge saved us many miles of detour, and perhaps the safety of the entire command. From this point, we advanced to Blount's Farm, where a sharp engagement occurred, resulting in the defeat of the rebels. But our success was dearly bought. Colonel Hathaway of the 73rd Indiana, a gallant and brave officer, was killed while leading a charge. He fell pierced with bullets, his last words being, "Forward, boys, forward!" This battle, though a success, greatly exhausted our men and animals. We had been marching and fighting day and night. Our rations were almost exhausted, and our ammunition nearly gone. Still, we pressed on, hoping to reach Rome, Georgia, before the enemy could concentrate a force sufficient to oppose us. Captain Russell, with a detachment of 200 men, was sent forward to seize the bridge across the Coosa River and hold it until the main body could arrive. He moved rapidly, but not rapidly enough. The enemy had been warned by couriers from General Forrest and made ample preparations to receive us. The bridge was barricaded, the banks lined with troops, and artillery planted to command the approaches. Captain Russell reconnoitered the position, and finding it impossible to carry the bridge by assault, fell back to await the arrival of Colonel Strait. The situation was now critical. The enemy, under General Forrest, was pressing us closely in the rear. The bridge in front was strongly held. Our men and horses were worn out with fatigue. A council of war was held. It was determined to attempt a flank movement and cross the river above or below the city. But at this juncture, General Forrest sent in a flag of truce, demanding an unconditional surrender. Colonel Strait refused. A second summons was sent. Again he declined. Finally, being completely surrounded with no possibilities of escape, and desiring to spare the further effusion of blood, he consented to surrender on condition that officers should retain their sidearms and private property. This was agreed to. The men stacked their arms, and the expedition was ended. Chapter 3. Imprisonment. Our captors treated us with comparative kindness the first day. We were allowed to retain our blankets, and some of us, by paying exorbitant prices, procured food from the neighboring houses. But this indulgence was of short duration. We were soon hurried off to Rome, and thence to Atlanta, Georgia. Here we were placed in a filthy prison, crowded together in a small room, without beds or blankets, and supplied with insufficient and unwholesome food. The air was foul, and the heat stifling. In this place we remained several days, until a sufficient number of prisoners had been collected to make a train load. We were then sent to Richmond. Our journey was tedious and painful. We were crowded into close boxcars, without seats, and compelled to lie upon the floor, in the most uncomfortable positions. At night, the cars were locked and no one allowed to leave them. Our food consisted of a small piece of bread and meat once a day, and the water we obtained was from ditches and swamps along the road. The guards were brutal and often amused themselves by striking or shooting at the prisoners. One man, whose name I have forgotten, was killed by a guard for attempting to look out of the car. When we arrived at Richmond, we were first taken to Libby Prison. This was a large brick warehouse, originally used for the storage of tobacco, but now converted into a prison for Union officers. It was situated on the corner of Carey and 20th Streets, near the canal and not far from the James River. It had 3 floors, each about 100 feet long by 40 wide. The lower floor was used by the prison officials and as a hospital for the sick. The second and third floors were used for prisoners. Here we found several hundred officers, captured at various times and places. They received us kindly and did all in their power to make us comfortable. But there was little comfort in Libby. The floor was our bed, our pillow a brick or a knapsack. The food was scanty and bad. The water was muddy and warm. The air was close and impure. The stench was horrible. Many of the prisoners were sick. Some were dying. Their groans and moans were heartrending. Yet they received no attention, no medicine, no care. A surgeon was nominally in charge, but he seldom came, and when he did nothing. There were no beds, no blankets, no clothing. The sick lay on the bare floor, with only their coats or rags to cover them. In this horrible place we passed the summer of 1863. The heat was intense, the air foul, the food nauseous. Day after day, we sat or lay upon the floor, gazing through the iron bars at the blue sky above, and wondering whether we were ever again to breathe the air of freedom. There was little to relieve the monotony. Now and then, a newspaper was smuggled in, or a letter from home. Sometimes we were allowed to write to our friends, but the letters were seldom forwarded. Sometimes a kind-hearted lady would send us a little fruit or some books. But, as a rule, the citizens of Richmond treated us with cruelty and contempt. We were cursed in the streets, abused in the papers, and insulted by the guards. Some of them were fiends in human shape. They took delight in tormenting the prisoners and inventing new modes of annoyance. One of them, named Ross, was particularly brutal. He boasted of having shot several prisoners and said he hoped to shoot more. Another, named Turner, was commandant of the prison. He was a tyrant and a coward, insolent to the prisoners, but cringing to his superiors. He made life a burden to us all. We were not allowed to receive money or clothing or food from our friends. Many boxes were sent to us, but they were stolen or rifled by the officials. Clothing was taken out and sold. Delicacies were eaten by the guards. Money was never delivered. We suffered from cold, from hunger, from filth. Some went insane, some died of despair. Yet we bore it all, in the hope that the day of deliverance would come. It did come at last, but not for all. Many of our brave comrades were carried out of Libby feet foremost, and buried like dogs in shallow graves, with no stone to mark the spot. Their names are forgotten by the world, but they are written in heaven. Let their memory be cherished by a grateful people. Let their sufferings and their wrongs be remembered until justice is done to the guilty authors of them. That's chapter 4, Life in Prison. It is difficult to describe life in a southern prison. To one who has never experienced it, no description is adequate. To one who has, none is necessary. Imagine yourself shut up in a room 40 feet by 100 with 200 other men. The floor is your bed. A single blanket is your only covering. Your food consists of a piece of cornbread and a small bit of meat once a day. There is no chair, no table, no bedstead. The windows are grated. The doors are locked. A guard stands without, ready to shoot any man who dares to look out. You are sick. There is no doctor, no medicine, no care. You lie all day and all night on the floor, moaning in pain. Around you are others, sick and well, dying and dead. You cannot move without stepping on someone. The air is foul. The stench is horrible. You are covered with vermin. Your clothes are in rags. Your heart is breaking. Your only hope is in death or exchange. Such was life in Libby, and yet we tried to make it endurable. We organized clubs and societies. We had a debating club, a Bible class, a choir, a theater. We gave lectures, concerts, plays. We celebrated the 4th of July, Thanksgiving, Christmas. We tried to keep up our spirits, to forget our sufferings, to hope for better days. But it was hard. Every day brought some new misery. The rations were reduced. The guards were more insolent. The air grew fouler. The vermin increased. The sick multiplied. The dead were more frequent. We were starved, frozen, suffocated, and we were told that it was done in retaliation. Because our government had put rebel prisoners on short rations, we must be starved. Because it had placed rebel officers under fire at Charleston, we must be crowded into foul dungeons. Because it had refused to exchange Negro soldiers, we must be punished. What had we to do with these things? Were we responsible for the policy of the government? And even if we were, was it right to visit its vengeance on helpless prisoners? Was it manly? Was it Christian? Was it civilized? Would a savage nation have done worse? But it was in keeping with the whole spirit of the rebellion. The leaders of the South hated the Union soldier with a hatred which knew no bounds. They called us hirelings, vandals, thieves. They denied us the rights of prisoners of war. They refused to exchange us. They tried to break our spirits, to crush our bodies, to destroy our lives. They hoped to send us home so diseased and disheartened that we would be no more fit for duty. They did send thousands home only to die. They kept thousands till they died in prison. And when the truth began to be known, they denied it. They said our men were fed as well as theirs. They pointed to their own poor rations and said they could do no better. But they lied. The rebel army was well fed. Their prisoners were not. Our men were starved on purpose. It was part of the system. It was a part of the plan. It was deliberate murder. Let the world know it. Let it ring through the land. Let it go down to history that the men who planned and executed the rebellion starved their prisoners not from necessity, but from choice. Chapter 5. Belle Isle. Belle Isle is a small island in the James River, opposite the city of Richmond. It contains about 6 acres of ground, and was formerly used as a place of resort for picnics and pleasure parties. During the war, it was converted into a prison pen for Union soldiers. Here, in an open field, without shelter or covering, thousands of our men were confined during the winter of 1863-4. They had no tents, no barracks, no stoves, no blankets. They were exposed to the snow, the sleet, the rain, the wind, and the cold. They lay upon the bare ground without even straw beneath them. Their rations were a piece of cornbread and a few ounces of meat per day. Their clothing was thin, ragged, and often insufficient to cover them. Their shoes were worn out. Their feet were frostbitten. Their hands were cracked and bleeding. Their faces were blue with cold. They huddled together at night like sheep to keep from freezing. Many were frozen to death. Many died of pneumonia. Many went insane. Many were crippled for life. No fire was allowed. No axe was furnished. No doctor came to relieve their sufferings. They were driven out at sunrise and herded together till night. They were not allowed to walk about. They were not allowed to build huts. They were not allowed to gather wood. They were not allowed to speak to visitors. If they approached the bank of the river, they were shot. If they looked over the line, they were shot. If they stooped to pick up a chip, they were shot. The dead were hauled out every morning, like logs. Sometimes they were left for days, lying among the living. The stench was horrible. The filth was beyond description. There was no soap, no towels, no change of clothing. Lice covered every man. Fever broke out and spread like fire. Men raved in delirium and died unattended. Their comrades laid them out with stiffened hands and covered them with rags. They dug shallow graves with broken spoons and buried them by night. Sometimes the ground was frozen, and the dead were piled like cordwood, awaiting burial. Sometimes they were thrown into trenches without coffins, without ceremony, without a prayer. They were not men, they were Yankees. They were to be wiped out. The Richmond Examiner, a leading rebel paper, advocated their extermination. It said they were vermin, fit only to be killed. It said the quickest way to end the war was to starve and freeze the Yankee prisoners. It said we could never whip them in the field, but we could destroy them in prison. It said to feed and clothe them was folly. It said to give them medicine was madness. It said, let them die, and they did die, by thousands, by tens of thousands. Let the world remember it. Let the people of America remember it. Let them teach it to their children. Let them engrave it on stone. Let them write it on the walls. Let them never forget that their sons were murdered at Belle Isle, by the orders and with the approval of the Southern leaders. Let them never rest till justice is done, and the guilty are punished. Chapter 6. Winter in Libby. The winter of 1863-4 was one of intense suffering in Libby prison. The weather was unusually cold. Snow fell deep and long. The windows were broken. The doors were loose. The wind swept through the rooms like a hurricane. We had no fires. We had no stoves. We had no wood. We lay on the bare floor, wrapped in our thin blankets, shivering from head to foot. Our shoes were worn out. Our clothes were in rags. Our limbs were stiff with cold. Some froze to death. Some lost fingers and toes. Some became paralyzed. Frost covered the walls. Ice formed on the floor. Our food was worse than ever. The bread was made of sour meal mixed with water. The meat was putrid. The soup was greasy water with a few beans. The coffee was made of burnt meal. Sometimes we had rice full of worms. Sometimes we had black beans full of bugs. Sometimes we had nothing. Our rations were stolen by the guards. The cooks sold them in the city. We were starving. We were freezing. We were sick. There was no hospital. There was no medicine. There was no surgeon. There was no care. The sick lay among the well. The dying groaned on the floor. The dead were carried out daily. They were laid on the sidewalk, in the snow. They were hauled to the graveyard in carts. They were buried like dogs. We saw them no more. Yet we tried to be cheerful. We tried to keep up our courage. We joked. We sang. We told stories. We played games. We wrote verses. We made speeches. We formed clubs. We acted plays. We had a debating society. We discussed the war, politics, philosophy, religion. We had a school. We studied French, Latin, mathematics. We tried to forget our sufferings. We tried to remember that we were soldiers. We tried to be men. Sometimes we succeeded. Sometimes we failed. Sometimes we wept like children. Sometimes we groaned in despair. Sometimes we cursed our fate. But more often we prayed. We asked God to help us. We asked Him to save our country. We asked Him to comfort our families. We asked Him to deliver us. He did. After many months, after long suffering, after bitter trials, He brought us out of the house of bondage. But some were left behind. Some never saw the light again. Some lie in southern graves, unknown, unhonored, but not forgotten. Their names are written in the book of life. Their memory is dear to every loyal heart. Let it be cherished forever. Chapter 7. Escape of Anderson and Skelton. Among the many thrilling incidents of prison life, None is more interesting than the escape of Captain Anderson and Lieutenant Skelton. They were both captured with Colonel Strait and confined in Libby. They were young, brave, daring. They determined to escape. They watched for days to find a chance. At last they saw that the guards below were careless and often left the door open. They resolved to attempt it. One dark night, when all was still, they crept softly down the stairs. The guard was asleep. They passed him. They reached the door. They opened it and stepped out into the street. No one saw them. No one heard them. They walked rapidly away. They passed through alleys and lanes, avoiding the main streets. They dared not speak. They dared not run. Every moment they expected to be stopped. At last they reached the suburbs. Here they found a colored man who took them in and hid them in his cabin. He gave them food. He gave them old clothes. He told them which way to go. They rested a few hours, then started again. They traveled by night and hid by day. They followed the railroad south, keeping near the track. They begged food at the cabins. They were helped by the slaves. They met with many adventures. Once they were chased by bloodhounds. Once they were fired at by guerrillas. Once they were nearly drowned in a swamp. Once they lay for 2 days in a hollow log, while the rebels were searching for them. Still they pressed on. Their clothes were in rags, their shoes were gone, their feet were blistered and bleeding. They were thin, weak, hungry, but determined. They never gave up. They never turned back. After 22 days of peril and hardship, they reached the Union lines. They were received with cheers. They were sent to Washington. They were furnished with clothing and money. They were granted leave of absence. They went home to their friends. They were heroes. Their escape gave new hope to the prisoners. It showed that liberty was possible. It inspired many others to make the attempt. Some succeeded, some failed, some were shot, some were recaptured. Some died in the woods, but all preferred death to captivity. Libby was a hell. Any fate was better. The escape of Anderson and Skelton was one of the boldest on record. Let it be remembered. Chapter 8. The Libby Tunnel. The most remarkable escape from Libby was by the tunnel. This has become historical. It was the boldest, the most successful, the most celebrated of all. More than 100 officers made their escape at once. The plan was conceived by Colonel Rose of the 77th Pennsylvania. He was a man of great courage, coolness, and perseverance. He proposed to dig a tunnel from the cellar of the prison to a point beyond the stockade. The difficulties were immense. The risk was terrible. The labor was immense. The cellar was damp, dark, and filled with rubbish. The only tools were pocket knives, spoons, and chisels. The earth had to be carried out in their pockets or hid under the straw. The tunnel had to be worked by turns. Only 2 could work at a time. The air was stifling. The roof was liable to cave in. The slightest noise would betray them. Discovery was death. Still they worked on. Day after day, night after night, they toiled in darkness and silence. They took turns watching the guards. They used a blanket to deaden the sound. They measured the distance by guess. They made slow progress. Sometimes they struck a rock. Sometimes the tunnel caved in. Sometimes the air gave out. Still they persevered. At last, after many weeks, they reached the end. They came up under a tobacco shed outside the stockade. They waited till night. Then one by one, they crawled through the tunnel. It was barely large enough for a man. Some stuck fast and had to be pulled out. Some lost their way after getting out. Some were recaptured, but 109 got away. Among them were many brave and distinguished officers. Colonel Strait attempted to escape through the tunnel, but he was a large man and became fast. He was wedged in the narrow passage, unable to move forward or backward. For a time, his situation was perilous. He was nearly suffocated. At last he was pulled back. He was bruised and fainting. He was saved, but disappointed. He afterwards escaped by another route. Many of the officers who escaped were aided by the slaves. They hid them in cabins. They fed them. They guided them. They piloted them through swamps and forests. They risked their own lives to save them. Let their names be honored. Some of the fugitives were concealed by loyal women. One lady kept 2 officers in her house for 10 days. She fed them, clothed them, nursed them. She saved them. She was a heroine. Others wandered in the woods for weeks. They lived on roots and berries. They swam rivers. They climbed mountains. They slept under logs. They suffered everything. But they gained liberty. They reached our lines. They were free again. They had escaped from Libby. They were safe under the old flag. Chapter 9. Kilpatrick's Expedition. In the winter of 1863-4, an expedition was planned for the release of the Union prisoners in Richmond. It was known that many thousands of our brave men were confined in Libby, Belle Isle, and other places. They were suffering untold miseries. They were dying by hundreds. It was determined to attempt their rescue. The plan was bold and hazardous. It was to strike a sudden blow at Richmond, liberate the prisoners, and retreat. The command was given to General Kilpatrick, a brave and dashing officer. He was to start from the north with a cavalry force, dash down on the city, surprise the guards, and open the prison doors. Colonel Dahlgren, with a picked detachment, was to cooperate. He was to approach from another direction and attack at the same time. The whole plan was well arranged. The hour came. The troops moved. The march was rapid and secret. The enemy were not aware of the movement. All promised success. Kilpatrick reached the vicinity of Richmond. But the plan miscarried. Dahlgren was delayed. He lost his way. He was attacked by a superior force. He was killed. His men were scattered. Some were captured. Some escaped. Kilpatrick, finding himself unsupported, retired. The prisoners were not released. The expedition had failed, but it spread terror in Richmond. The citizens were panic-stricken. The authorities were alarmed. The guards were doubled. The prisons were strengthened. The newspapers denounced the raid as a plot to burn the city and murder the officials. They accused Dahlgren of intending to assassinate Davis and his cabinet. They published a paper found on his person, purporting to give such instructions. It was probably a forgery, but it answered their purpose. They made it an excuse for new severities. The prisoners were more closely confined. The rations were reduced. The punishments were increased. All communication with friends was cut off. The excitement lasted for weeks. Every man who attempted to escape was treated with unusual rigor. New guards were placed around the prisons. Watchdogs were stationed in the yards. Traps and alarms were arranged. The jailers were more insolent. The people more bitter. The hopes of the prisoners were crushed. Their chance of rescue was gone. They sank into despair. Many died of disappointment. Many lost their reason. The failure of Kilpatrick's expedition was a terrible blow. But it was not his fault. He did all that man could do. He risked his life and fame. He deserved success. He had the thanks of the army and the country. The prisoners never blamed him. They blessed his name. They prayed for his safety. They honored his courage. They hoped to see him again. They never forgot the gallant attempt to save them. Chapter Dex. Colonel Straight's Escape. Among the many escapes from prison, none was more daring or successful than that of Colonel Strait. He had been confined in Libby nearly a year. He had made several attempts to escape. He had tried the tunnel, but failed. He had tried bribery, but was betrayed. He had tried force, but was overpowered. At last, he hit upon a new plan. He feigned illness. He complained of weakness. He staggered as he walked. He lay all day upon the floor. He asked to be sent to the hospital. The request was granted. He was removed to a room below. He was put in charge of a surgeon. Here he found more liberty. He was allowed to go out. He was permitted to walk in the yard. He studied the premises. He marked the location of the guards. He watched the habits of the officers. He noted the time when the gate was opened. He saw that at a certain hour the sentinel left his post for a few minutes. He determined to use that moment. He made a rope of blankets. He prepared a disguise. He waited for a dark night. He told his comrades of his plan. They approved it. They promised to help him. The night came, the signal was given. The gate was opened, the guard turned away. Colonel Straight slipped out. He ran to the fence. He threw over his bundle. He climbed up. He dropped into the street. He was free. He walked rapidly away. He turned corner after corner. He passed through alley after alley. At last, he stopped at a Negro cabin. He knocked. A woman opened the door. He told her who he was. She hid him. She gave him food. She sent for a friend. He came. He took the colonel in a cart covered with straw. He drove him out of the city. They passed the guards. They crossed the lines. They reached the country. Here the colonel left the cart. He took to the woods. He traveled by night. He hid by day. He was fed by the slaves. He was guided by the loyal blacks. He met with many adventures. Once he was chased by dogs. Once he was fired at. Once he was nearly drowned. Once he was taken for a spy. But he escaped all dangers. He pressed on. He crossed rivers. He climbed mountains. He waded swamps. He swam creeks. At last, he reached the Union lines. He was received with joy. He was sent to Washington. He was restored to his command. He was welcomed by his comrades. He was honored by the people. His escape was a triumph. It was a proof of his courage, his coolness, his perseverance. Let it be remembered. Chapter 20. Charleston Jail. After the escape of Colonel Straight and several other officers, the authorities determined to adopt more rigorous measures. A number of the most prominent prisoners were selected and sent to Charleston. Here they were confined in the city jail. This was an old, dirty, dilapidated building, infested with vermin and reeking with filth. The windows were barred with iron. The doors were locked with heavy bolts. The rooms were dark, damp, and crowded. The air was foul. The food was scanty. The water was bad. The treatment was brutal. The prisoners were insulted by the guards. They were jeered at by the citizens. They were exposed to the fire of their own friends. The city was being bombarded by the Union forces. The shells fell all around the jail. They shook the walls. They broke the windows. They tore up the streets. They endangered the lives of the prisoners. They were placed there on purpose. It was done in retaliation. The rebel authorities declared that if their prisoners were exposed at Morris Island, they would expose ours at Charleston. They kept their word. They placed our officers under fire. They refused to remove them, though requested by General Foster. They said it was just. They said it was right. They gloried in it. Our officers protested. They appealed to humanity. They appealed to the world, but it was in vain. They were kept there for weeks. They were not allowed to write. They were not allowed to speak. They were prisoners, but worse than prisoners. They were hostages. They were menaced with death. They were threatened with execution. They were told that if a rebel was shot, they should be shot. They lived in constant danger. They slept in their clothes. They were ready for flight or death. They saw the shells coming. They heard them burst. They felt the shock. They prayed for deliverance. It came at last. The government protested. The people cried out. The world condemned. The rebels were ashamed. They removed the prisoners. They sent them to Columbia. They shut them up in a filthy jail. They tried to hide their cruelty. But it was too late. The truth was known. The record was made. The civilized world saw it. Let it not be forgotten. Let it be written on the page of history. Let it stand forever that American officers were placed under fire by American rebels in violation of every law of war, of humanity, and of God. Chapter 15. Columbia. The jail at Columbia was an old brick building, formerly used for county purposes. It stood on a hill near the courthouse. It was surrounded by a high wall with broken glass on the top. The rooms were small, low, and dark. The floors were of stone. The windows were grated. The doors were barred. There was no furniture. There were no beds. There was no fire. The cold was intense. The snow lay deep on the ground. The prisoners lay on the floor, wrapped in their blankets. Their breath froze on their faces. Their limbs were stiff. Their feet were frostbitten. Their fingers were benumbed. Their teeth chattered. They could not sleep. They could not move. They were half dead. They begged for fire. It was refused. They begged for wood. It was denied. They begged for straw. It was not given. They begged for beds. They were laughed at. They were told to lie still and freeze. Some did freeze. Some died. Their bodies were stiff in the morning. They were dragged out like logs. They were thrown into carts. They were buried in trenches. No one wept. No one cared. They were Yankees. Their sufferings were a jest. Their groans were a song. Their death was a triumph. This was Columbia. This was the capital of South Carolina. This was the home of secession. This was the heart of the rebellion. This was the seat of the chivalry. This was the center of Southern civilization. This was the place where the best blood of the North was frozen, starved, and murdered. Let the world know it. Let history write it. Let it go down to future ages that in the 19th century, in a Christian land, under a Christian government, men were starved and frozen to death because they loved their country and fought for the Union. Let Columbia be remembered. Let its name be linked with Andersonville, Belle Isle, and Salisbury. Let it be a warning to rebels, traitors, and tyrants in all time to come. Let the loyal people of the North never forget the sufferings of their sons. Let them demand justice. Let them punish the guilty. Let them swear by the graves of the dead, never to trust treason again. Chapter 13. Florence. Florence was one of the later prisons. It was established after the fall of Atlanta, when Sherman began his march to the sea. It was located in South Carolina, on the line of the railroad. It was built on a barren plain, without trees or shelter or shade. It was enclosed by a high stockade made of rough logs set upright in the ground. Inside was an open space covered with sand and intersected by a shallow stream. There were no tents. There were no barracks. There were no kitchens. There was no hospital. The men lived in holes in the ground. They burrowed like beasts. They dug pits with broken plates and crawled into them to sleep. They covered them with boards, with rags, with anything they could find. They lay there all day to keep from freezing. They could not stand up. They could not stretch out. They could hardly breathe. Their clothes were in rags. Their shoes were gone. Their limbs were swollen. Their faces were black with smoke. Their hands were cracked and bleeding. Their bodies were covered with vermin. Their hair was matted. Their eyes were sunken. Their lips were blue. Their voices were weak. They were shadows, specters, ghosts. They walked like old men. They tottered as they moved. They coughed. They moaned. They died. Every morning the dead were carried out. Every night the dying groaned in agony. No one cared. No one helped. No one wept. The guards looked on and laughed. The officers made jests. The people said, "Let them die." And they did die, by hundreds, by thousands. They starved, they froze, they rotted, they went mad. They killed each other in frenzy. They fell down and never rose. They were dragged to the trench. They were thrown in like dogs. They were covered with sand. They were forgotten. This was Florence. This was the last hell of the rebellion. This was the climax of cruelty. This was the consummation of Southern vengeance. Let it be known, let it be told, let it be written in letters of fire, let it be remembered forever. Chapter 14. Paroled. At last the day of deliverance came. The doors were opened, the chains were broken, the captives were free. They could hardly believe it. They looked at each other in silence. They wept, they laughed, they embraced, they thanked God. They tottered out of the gates. They staggered to the cars. They leaned on each other for support. They had no strength. They had no voice. They were skeletons. They were shadows. They were the wrecks of men. They were carried to the boats. They were borne to Annapolis. They were received with open arms. They were fed, clothed, and comforted. They were sent to their homes. They were welcomed by their friends. They were honored by the people. They were nursed with tender care. Some recovered, some never did. Some lived for years. Crippled, broken, miserable. Some died soon after. Some lingered long and died at last. All bore the marks of suffering. All were victims of the rebellion. They had been starved, beaten, frozen, poisoned. They had been murdered by inches. Their bodies were wrecked. Their minds were shaken. Their hearts were broken. Their spirits were crushed. They were paroled, but they were not free. They were prisoners still, in pain, in weakness, in memory. Let their names be honored. Let their wrongs be avenged. Let their country never forget them. Chapter 15. Testimony. The facts stated in this book are not fictions. They are not rumors. They are not guesses. They are not exaggerations. They are facts. They are proved. They are sworn to. They rest on testimony. They are taken from official records. They are given by eyewitnesses. They are supported by names, dates, places. They cannot be denied. They will not be denied. The world knows them. The rebels know them. The loyal people know them. The Congress of the United States investigated them. A committee was appointed. It examined witnesses. It received documents. It made a report. The report was terrible. It astonished the nation. It shocked the world. It revealed horrors unknown before. It painted a picture of cruelty never surpassed. It showed that thousands of brave men had perished miserably in Southern prisons. It showed that they were starved on purpose. It showed that they were neglected willfully. It showed that they were murdered deliberately. It gave names. It gave dates. It gave figures. It proved the guilt of the rebel leaders. It proved the responsibility of the rebel government. It proved the complicity of the rebel people. It called for justice. It demanded punishment. It asked that the world should know the truth. It asked that the names of the dead should be honored. It asked that the names of the murderers should be remembered. It asked that the loyal people should never forget. It asked that future generations should be warned. It spoke boldly. It spoke truly. It spoke well. Let its voice be heard. Let its testimony be read. Let its words be engraven on the heart of the nation. Chapter 15. Conclusion. The war is over. The rebellion is crushed. The Union is saved. The flag floats again over every state. The soldiers have returned. The captives are free. The nation rejoices. But it must not forget. It must not forget the cause of the war. It must not forget the crimes of the rebellion. It must not forget the sufferings of the prisoners. It must not forget the blood that was shed. It must not forget the lives that were lost. It must not forget the graves that are made. It must remember the price of liberty. It must remember the cost of union. It must remember the value of justice. It must remember the duty of patriotism. It must remember the danger of treason. It must remember the necessity of law. It must remember the power of God. Let the nation be grateful. Let it be faithful. Let it be just. Let it be true. Let it reward the brave. Let it honor the dead. Let it protect the living. Let it cherish the memory of its heroes. Let it teach their story to its children. Let it engrave their names on its monuments. Let it keep their fame in its heart. Let it never forget their trials, their sufferings, their sacrifices. Let it hate treason. Let it despise cruelty. Let it punish wrong. Let it uphold right. Let it fear God. Let it love man. Let it be a nation indeed, worthy of its past, true to its principles, loyal to its martyrs, faithful to its mission. So shall it live. So shall it prosper. So shall it bless the world. So shall it please God. The end.
If you found this video insightful and engaging, don't forget to give it a like to support the channel. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming historical videos. Feel free to leave a comment below with your thoughts or suggestions for future topics. Thank you for watching.